In the single most important moment of a hunt, when the wounded deer was just one leap from her teeth, an old gray wolf in the Bitterroot Mountains heard something else. The fading, final cry of a bobcat cub trapped in a rocky ravine below. She should have ignored it or ended it quickly. Instead, she turned her back on the easy kill and walked away carrying not meat, but the child of an enemy. From that second on, an impossible family was born between a wolf, a bobcat, a weary rancher, and a lonely wildlife biologist. And the way their story ends is something no hunter, no scientist, and no viewer ever expects to see. Snow had been falling since noon, the fine, dry kind that never seemed to land, only to drift and swirl and whisper around the trunks of the pines. By late afternoon, the Bitterroot Mountains were wrapped in a gray hush, the kind of quiet older folks remember from winters before traffic and cell towers, when the only sound at dusk was the wind and your own breathing. High on a slope scarred by fallen timber, a lone gray wolf named Mara moved through that silence like a shadow that had learned to walk. Her ribs showed under her winter coat. Each step was deliberate, placed in the old tracks she had made earlier in the day to save what little strength she had left. Hunger had narrowed her world for weeks now, yet her eyes were still sharp, the yellow of them watching every shift of the wind, every small drift of snow that might betray movement. Ahead, just beyond a stand of scrubby firs, the smell of blood and fear lingered in the air. It was the scent of hope, as strange as that would sound to anyone who had never gone to bed truly hungry. The mule deer had broken a leg sometime before dawn. A misstep on ice, a slide into a hidden hole. Mara could read the story in the torn-up snow and the jagged track of hoof prints. All afternoon she had followed, not close enough to spook it into a desperate run, but never so far that she lost the scent. Patience was her only wealth now. People put money into retirement savings and life insurance. They study mortgage rates and worry over health insurance plans. Mara had none of those comforts. Her security was measured in how quietly she could move and how well she could wait. Now, at last, the deer was near the edge of its strength. She could hear its labored breathing between the trees, see the steam rising from its nostrils each time it exhaled. It stood three-legged in the dimming light, sides heaving, head low. One more rush, and it would go down. One clean bite at the throat, and there would be meat for days. The cold in Mara's belly clenched tight at the thought. She lowered herself until her chest brushed the snow, muscles coiling, tail held low, ears flattened against the wind. Time thinned around her, stretched long, like those slow moments before a driver decides whether to hit the brakes on black ice. The world shrank to the deer's outline and the space between them. She shifted her weight, finding the exact angle that would carry her forward in a single explosive leap. Snow stung her eyes and melted on her lashes. Her breath came in quiet, controlled streams, each exhale a ghost curling away into the air. She could feel the ground under her pads, solid and cold and certain. A single thought filled her. Now. As she gathered herself, a sound cut across the slope, thin as a thread, but sharp as a shard of glass. It did not belong to the deer. It did not belong to the wind. It pierced straight through the narrow tunnel of her focus and widened it in an instant. A cry. It came from below, from somewhere down in the ravine that split the hillside like an old scar. Not the deep coughing bark of a fox or the yip of a coyote, but a higher, rawer sound, broken at the edges. A small voice, ragged with fear and cold. It rose once, hung on the air, then faltered into a series of desperate, choked calls. Mara froze in mid-crouch, muscles trembling with the effort of stopping herself from launching. The deer lifted its head, ears twitching, sensing something had shifted, but not yet knowing what. For a heartbeat, 2, 3. The world balanced on a knife's edge. The promise of warm flesh was only a few strides away. Her whole body throbbed with the need to close that distance. The cry came again. It was weaker this time, as if the little lungs that produced it were already tiring. To another animal, it might have been just noise, another scrap of suffering in a winter full of it. To Mara, it struck a different place. Deep behind her ribs, in the part of herself that no hunger could quite erase, something old and aching stirred. Not long ago, other voices had answered her own howls on these slopes. Small paws had stepped where hers stepped now, clumsy and bright, tumbling over each other in fresh snow. A heavier set of footsteps, steady and sure, had circled them, keeping watch. The memory was a picture she had been trying not to look at for weeks, shoving it down the way an old homeowner tries not to think about the crack in the foundation. But the sound from the ravine reopened it in an instant. She could almost feel the brush of soft muzzles at her belly again, hear the thin, hungry squeaks turning into playful growls. Instead, there was nothing near her but empty snow and the harsh scent of her own starvation. The deer shifted its weight, gave a shuddering snort, and tried to hobble a few steps farther into the trees. The wound in its leg dragged, painting the snow behind it with a darker stripe. Mara's jaw clenched. Instinct screamed at her to finish the hunt. In this wild country, there were no credit cards, no emergency funds, no convenient grocery stores open late. A missed chance like this could mean another week of gnawing emptiness. The smart choice, the choice a younger, unbroken wolf would make without a second thought, was to leap now and end it. But the cry from the ravine would not leave her. It threaded through the wind, weaving in and out of the sighing branches, coming in short, fading bursts. Each time it reached her ears, her body betrayed her. The skin along her flanks prickled, her tail twitched, her heart gave an odd, painful tug, as if responding to a call it did not want to answer and could not ignore. Slowly, almost against her own will, Mara's ears turned toward the sound. Her eyes slipped away from the outline of the deer and down the slope to where the land dropped off into a darker seam of shadow. The ravine was a dangerous place in winter. Ice-slick rocks, hidden holes, old logging trash left by men who had long ago driven their trucks back to warmer towns. It was no place for a hungry wolf to wander without reason. Another cry reached her, thin as a last chance. Mara exhaled, a long, low breath that sent a plume of steam into the cold air. The deer limped one more staggering step and stopped, sides heaving, unaware that death had stepped back from the edge for a moment. The wolf rose from her crouch, joints protesting, the coiled spring of her attack unwinding into something less certain, more complicated. For a few seconds she stood between two futures, one written in the blood of the deer, the other hidden in the shadows below. Then, with a small shake of her head, as if trying to dislodge the memory of tiny paws and lost voices, Mara turned away from the sure kill. She took her first step downslope toward the ravine, and the fading cry of a creature she had never seen, but could already feel tugging on the oldest, most fragile part of her. Weeks before Mara turned away from the dying deer, the mountains still answered her voice. On clear nights her pack would climb to an open slope and lift their muzzles, sending long, braided howls over the dark pines. In the valley, a few porch lights burned while older hands sorted pill bottles or glanced at another health insurance bill. Now and then, someone paused, listening, and said quietly, "Hear that? Wolves are back up there." Then they went inside, and the wild song thinned behind furnace hum and evening news. Back then, Mara was not a lone gray shadow. Ridge, her mate, walked steady at her side, a broad-shouldered wolf with a dark saddle and calm, measuring eyes. Oak, the old male, moved stiffly, but still knew every draw and game trail the way an old rancher knows each fence post. 3 pups tumbled between them, Ash, Bramble, and shy little Tuck, all too much paw and not enough sense. They chewed sticks, chased snowflakes, then slept in a warm heap against Mara's belly, while Ridge and Oak took turns watching the mouth of the den. Life was lean but ordered, a simple rhythm of hunt, eat, rest, teach. To Hank Miller, those same night songs were not comfort, but warning. His cattle dotted the lower pasture, each calf a line on a ledger he watched more closely than the weather. The house he lived in sat on the same spot his father had chosen, the mortgage now signed in his own hand. When he heard wolves, he didn't think of wilderness. He thought of feed bills, truck repairs, and whether he could keep up with the premiums on the life insurance policy he hoped would protect his wife if he didn't come back from a long day's work. One week, a young cow failed to show up with the rest of the herd. Snow wrote the story clearly enough. Hoofprints to a sagging stretch of fence, churned ground on the far side, a dark stain, then drag marks pulling toward the trees. Hank called it in. Maggie Turner drove out in a state truck, tires grinding on frozen ruts, a folder of forms on the seat beside her. Walking the line, she pointed to the weak fence, to coyote and raven tracks that had blurred the scene, and tried to explain compensation rules and non-lethal deterrence in a voice that stayed even. Hank listened, jaw tight, boots planted in the bloody snow. "That's all fine on paper," he said at last, nudging a faint wolf print with his toe. "But when one disappears, it's my checkbook that howls. Those wolves don't help me make a payment." They parted with a handshake that held more strain than warmth. A few days later, over coffee at the cafe, a pair of hard-talking hunters slid Hank a plain tin of poison, calling it just another tool. Hank took it home, telling himself he was only protecting what was his. The wolves knew nothing of this. They moved through their old routes, following elk scent along the ridges, breaking ice to drink from black water, teaching the pups when to stalk and when to lie still. On a steel-gray afternoon, the smell of meat drifted up from a shallow hollow below an old logging track, rich and fresh enough to make every stomach clench. There lay a mule deer, half covered in drifted snow, belly torn open, flesh still soft. The air held the faint tang of man, boot, cold metal, but the carcass was close and hunger had sharp teeth. The pups rushed in first, tails high, little bodies shaking with eagerness. Ridge dragged the carcass to firmer ground. Oak leaned in with the cautious bite of long habit. Mara paced the rim, unease prickling along her spine, then lowered her head and tore off a strip of meat. The taste was wrong. Beneath the richness lay a bitter edge, like old coins on her tongue. She spat, scraped at her teeth, swallowed what she already had because her body knew no other way. Around her the others ate greedily. Tuck stumbled first. One moment he was wedged between his siblings, the next his hind legs slipped sideways and folded. He collapsed, paws clawing at the air. Ash's head jerked up, foam starting at the corners of her mouth. Bramble gave a sharp yelp that broke in the middle and fell over, his small body going rigid. Ridge tried to bark a warning, but the sound shattered into a raw cough. His shoulders convulsed, paws gouging trenches in the snow. Oak backed away, legs stiff, then toppled heavily, breath rasping and shallow. Mara spat until her mouth burned, but the fire had already entered her limbs. Her muscles jerked and shook, turning her strong body clumsy. She stumbled to Tuck, nudged his neck, whined low in his ear, the way she did when waking him from puppy dreams. His eyes stared past her now. Ash's little chest rose once, twice, then stilled. Bramble's paws fluttered and fell. Snow began to sift down again, soft and indifferent, dusting gray fur and red-stained ground alike. In time, the burning eased to a trembling weakness. Mara lay among the bodies, listening for any sound that did not come. Ridge lay with his head against her flank, eyes closed. Oak was on his side, jaw slack. The pups were a small, tangled pile where warmth used to be. There were no sirens here, no doctor's office light, no number to call. The mountain kept its own books. At last she pushed herself upright, every joint screaming. She stood over her family and opened her mouth to howl. Nothing came. Her voice, once woven into the night air of these slopes, was trapped somewhere between her chest and her throat. When she turned away from the hollow, she did not look back. Winter would cover that place. Grass would grow there in spring. Elk would pass by, never knowing. That night, for the first time in many seasons, the Bitterroot Ridges lay under the stars without a single wolf song. The quiet settled into Mara's bones and walked with her after that. Weeks later, when a thin, desperate cry from a bobcat cub rose out of a different patch of snow, it would strike that silence inside her like a bell. Mara moved down the slope with the careful, sidewise steps of an animal that knew what one bad misstep could cost. Snow gave way under her weight in small, sliding sheets, carrying loose stones with it. Below her, the clean line of the hillside broke open into a dark crease where old water had once run, cutting a gash through the earth. In summer, melt would rush there, carrying branches and mud. Now it was a frozen scar, crusted with ice and drifted snow, and somewhere inside it, that thin, frayed voice kept calling. The sound came and went, as if the little lungs that made it were already close to giving out. Mara paused, listening, letting the mountain sort itself in her ears. The mutter of distant wind through fir needles, the faint creak of a tree loaded with ice, the soft hiss of snow settling. Underneath it all, that same raw high note rose again. It was the sound any parent knows in their bones, no matter the species, the cry of a young one who has run past fear and into panic. She reached the lip of the ravine and looked down. The drop wasn't far, but the rocks were slick where water had frozen in glassy sheets. Old cans and a strip of rusted fencing lay tangled in a snag of roots, trash left by men who had driven up here years ago and never bothered to haul their leavings home. People down in the valley might talk about retirement planning and high-yield savings accounts, about building a nest egg and paying off a mortgage on time. Up here, their forgotten junk became just one more way a foot could slip, one more way a neck could break. The cry came again, right below her now. Mara gathered herself and jumped. She landed hard, claws skidding on ice, slid, and caught herself against a boulder with a grunt. The air in the ravine was colder, held still by the walls of rock. It smelled of stone and old leaves, and something else, blood, tin, oil, the sharp ghost of human scent that never quite left once it had soaked into a place. She followed it around a bend, snow crunching under her paws. There, in a pocket of flattened snow, she found the source of the sound. A small body lay half-twisted in the drift, spotted fur standing out against the white. Big tufted ears, black bars on the legs, tail shorter than a house cat's, ending in a dark tip. Even if she had never seen one this close, every instinct in Mara knew what it was. A bobcat cub, no more than 7 or 8 weeks old. One hind leg was caught in the jaws of a steel trap, staked to the frozen ground. The trap's metal teeth bit deep into fur and flesh, blood already frozen in a dark fan around the wound. The cub tried to lift its head when she appeared, but the effort was too much. It only managed to turn its face toward her, eyes wide and glassy with pain. It hissed, or tried to, a wet, ragged sound that died in its throat. The smell of man was thick here, boot leather, gunpowder, the faint chemical tang of oil that might have come from a truck engine or a can of cheap gasoline. A few yards away, a rabbit carcass lay stiff on its side, fur slicked down by sleet. The trap had been baited well. Something larger than the cub had been here earlier. The snow told of heavier paws and a drag mark that ended in a patch of churned-up blood and boot prints. Mara stood over the little cat, head low, breath steaming around her muzzle. Every teaching written into her bones by the long line of wolves before her told her what to do. A predator caught in a trap was weak, and weakness in enemy teeth threatened everyone. A swift bite to the neck would end its suffering. No struggle, no danger. The men who had set the trap would come back to find an empty chain and assume their prize had been stolen by another hunter. The world would go on. She stepped closer. The cub shrank back as much as the cruel iron jaws would allow, a shiver running through its thin body. It made a sound then that was not quite a hiss and not quite a mew. It was a broken thing, childlike and hoarse, and it ran along Mara's nerves like ice water. She saw for a heartbeat not this bobcat, but Ash, one of her lost pups, flopping in poison-slicked snow, eyes begging for something no mother can give once the body has already decided to let go. Mara's lips pulled back from her teeth. She lowered her head until the cub's neck was a breath away. She could feel its heartbeat against her nose, a frantic flutter. Its front paw lifted, almost by instinct, and touched the thick fur at her chest. The pads were cold, the claws no more dangerous than thorns at that size. That one small touch went deeper than any fang could have. Behind her eyes, images flickered, the hollow where her pack had died, snow slowly covering small, still forms, the long, voiceless nights since, when she had wanted to howl and found nothing inside but a dry ache. The empty den, smelling of milk gone sour, and pups that would never return. Something in her chest that had been locked tight since that day gave a painful twist, as if waking. She closed her jaws, but not on the soft throat under her nose. Instead, her teeth found the chain that tethered the trap to its stake. Cold metal shocked her gums. She bit down until her jaw creaked, until rust and iron scraped against enamel. The chain gave with a sudden sharp snap that jarred her head. The trap stayed clamped on the cub's leg, but now it was no longer anchored. The cub gave a thin cry of fresh pain as the trap shifted. Mara ignored the protest, nudging her muzzle under its small body. She opened her mouth wide and took hold of the loose skin at the back of its neck, the way she had once carried her own pups. The taste was bobcat, wild and musky and wrong, and under it the copper of blood and the faint bitter edge of human metal. The weight of the trap dragged at its leg, but she lifted anyway, feeling every pound in her own weary muscles. With the cub hanging limp from her jaws, the steel contraption banging against her chest, Mara turned toward the slope she had slid down. Somewhere above, the deer she'd left behind was limping deeper into the trees, taking with it the easy meal she had earned. Hunger clawed at her from the inside as surely as the trap clawed at the cub's flesh. Still, she began to climb, each step a choice she did not fully understand, driven by a voice older than fear and older than prudence. The bobcat cub whimpered once, then went quiet, its small body swaying with her movement. Against her teeth, Mara could feel its pulse, still there, still fighting. For reasons no wildlife textbook or hunting guide would ever quite explain, the lone gray wolf carried her natural enemy's child out of the ravine and into the whitening dusk, away from certain death and toward a future neither of them could imagine. Mara climbed until the muscles in her shoulders burned, and her breath came out in short, smoky bursts. The bobcat cub hung from her jaws, limp except for the occasional twitch when the trap bumped against her chest. The weight of the steel dragged at her neck. Every few steps she had to stop and brace herself, claws digging into the frozen slope, so the two of them didn't slide backward into the ravine again. The wind picked up as she gained height, funneling down the mountain, carrying with it the faint smells of the human world far below. Wood smoke from a stove, Diesel from an old truck, the ghost of bacon grease. Down there, folks were rinsing coffee cups in warm water, checking their mail, maybe worrying over a mortgage statement or a set of auto insurance papers spread out on the kitchen table. Up here, the only paperwork was written in tracts and cent, and every wrong choice was paid for in bone and blood. At last the slope eased. Mara pulled herself over the rim and stood for a moment, chest heaving, the cub's small body swinging under her chin. Snow had begun to fall again, thicker now, softening the edges of rocks and stumps. She turned away from the open hillside and headed toward a stand of older pines clinging to a rocky shoulder that faced east. Her paws found a path she hadn't walked since before the poison, a narrow trail that skirted an outcrop and dropped into a shallow bowl of wind-scoured ground. The den lay in the back of that bowl, a dark opening under a tumble of boulders, half hidden by dead grass and the low droop of juniper. Years of wind had smoked the rocks above it, leaving them a shade darker than the snow. It was not much to look at, just a hole in the mountain, but it had held her whole world once. This was where Ridge had circled restlessly while she labored, where Oak had stood watch at the entrance, thick tail curled around his paws. This was where Ash, Bramble, and Tuck had taken their first wobbly steps, blinking at the light. Mara stopped a few yards away, suddenly unsure. The scent that drifted from the entrance was faint but still there. Old milk, old sleep, ghosts of small bodies at rest. Her heart tightened. To bring a stranger here, and not even a wolf, but a bobcat. The thought pulled against every wire of instinct that defined her. A den was a map of a family. You did not rewrite that map lightly. The cub whimpered around the loose skin in her teeth, a thin, breathy sound, more exhale than voice. The trap on its leg knocked against her foreleg, a dull, ugly weight. Mara lowered her head and stepped forward. Inside, the den was low enough that she had to duck. The air was warmer, still, holding the old smells like a cupboard holds light. Dust rose under her paws, dry and musty. Far back, the floor dipped into the hollow where she had once curled herself around 3 sleeping pups. Now it was just a shallow, scooped place in the dirt, a memory pressed into earth. She went to that spot and eased the cub down, careful not to let the trap bang too hard. It collapsed on its side, panting, sides fluttering. Its eyes were too big for its thin face, pupils blown wide in the gloom. It tried to pull the trapped leg under itself, and couldn't. The iron jaws held firm. Mara stood over it, her shadow falling across its body. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the cub lifted its head and gave a soft, questioning chirr, not quite a meow, not quite anything she knew. It smelled of fear and blood and pine duff, and, faintly, of another cat that was no longer here. The odor of that older bobcat mingled with a sour thread of gunpowder, and human sweat, a story written in scent, a cautious approach to the bait, the snap of the trap, the wild struggle, the sharp report of a rifle, boots dragging a heavier body away. Mara lowered her nose and began to lick around the trap, cleaning away blood and packed snow. Her tongue moved carefully over the mangled fur, warm and raspy. The cub flinched at first, then went still, eyes half closing as if that rough warmth, even in pain, was better than the cold bite of iron alone. She worked at the chain until it lay straight, easing the twist in the little leg, then lay down beside the cub, long body curved so that its head was near her chest. Outside, the snow whispered against the rocks. Inside, the only sound for a while was the rasp of her tongue and the cub's ragged breathing. Bit by bit, its body relaxed. It shifted awkwardly until its small spine rested against her foreleg. Mara felt its heartbeat through her fur, quick and fluttering. Without thinking, she let her chin rest lightly across its shoulders, the way she once had with pups that bore her own scent. The night deepened. Wind prowled over the bowl and down into the trees, but the den stayed still. Mara's eyes drooped, opened, drooped again. In the thin space between waking and sleep, she smelled Ridge's warm breath and heard Oak's low grunt, saw 3 small shapes curled tight against her belly. When she blinked fully awake, there was only one, and it wore spots and tufts and a trap on its leg. Far below, in the valley where porch lights marked the ends of driveways, Maggie Turner sat at her kitchen table, a laptop open in front of her. She scrolled through satellite maps and landowner records, thinking about how predator ranges overlapped with public land and private ranches, how fragile that balance was. Somewhere in another window, an ad for a home security system flashed, promising peace of mind for a low monthly payment. And another for online banking reminded her she was late paying her student loans. She clicked them away and pulled up the field reports from Hank Miller's place, noting the dates, the locations, the mention of poison. She had no way of knowing that just then a wolf and a bobcat cub were sharing breath in a den she had marked on her maps as historic wolf site, no recent activity. By the time she hiked that ridge with her trail cameras, the snow would have softened and hardened and fallen again, and the first tangled line of tracks leading to that forbidden hole in the rocks would already be old news to the mountain. For now, in the close dark of the den, Mara listened to the small, stubborn heartbeat against her leg and let herself, for the first time since her own pups died, drift into a sleep that was not entirely hollow. By the time the snow on the eastern face began to crust and soften in the same day, the steel jaws around the bobcat's leg had turned the fur there into a matted ring of scab and scar. The first morning Mara tried. To free him, the trap bit her nose and sent a lightning bolt of pain between her eyes. She leaped back, lips peeled, but came again, more careful, using her shoulder and the weight of her chest to press one side of the spring against a rock. The rusted metal groaned. With a dry, reluctant snap, the jaws opened enough for the little leg to jerk free. The cub. By then, Mara had begun to think of him as Finn, though the name came from no place she could name, screamed once and then collapsed, panting. His paw was ugly, swollen and bare in places, the fur rubbed off by iron and ice. He licked it in frantic circles, then stopped, exhausted. Mara sniffed at it, wrinkled her nose at the stink of old blood and metal, and set about cleaning it with slow, deliberate strokes of her tongue. It would never be quite right, that paw, but it would serve. Days tumbled over each other after that, each one much like the last, and yet never quite the same. Finn slept hard at first, curled into the hollow of her belly, waking only to eat the strips of rabbit and vole she brought him. His body, starved and shocked, chose life with the stubbornness that sometimes surprises doctors and old farmers alike. As the soreness in his leg eased, he began to move around the den, first dragging the injured paw, then putting tentative weight on it, the way an old man might test a knee that had betrayed him on a bad winter road. Mara, who had once taught wolf pups how to stalk and pounce, found herself adjusting everything she knew. She showed him how to put his nose to a line of scent and follow it step by patient step. But Finn's attention kept sliding upward, to the sway of branches, to a woodpecker ratcheting on dead bark, to the bright flick of a jay's tail. When she moved slowly through the trees, he would dart ahead and spring up onto a log, or climb halfway up a leaning trunk, looking back at her with wide, pleased eyes, as if to say, "See? I can go where you can't." The first time he scrambled all the way into the low branches of a spruce, her heart lurched. From the ground he was just a spotted ball of fur tangled in needles and snow, but to her he might as well have been dangling over a cliff. She paced below, whining softly, tail lashing. Finn tested the sway of the branch, misjudged, and came down in a shower of snow, landing on his bad paw. He yelped more from surprise than pain, then shook himself and ran to press his head into her chest, purring with a deep, rusty vibration that felt strange against her ribs, but not wrong. Outside their small world, other lives moved according to other clocks. In town, Maggie Turner printed maps and budget spreadsheets on a temperamental office machine, trying to stretch state funds across too many miles of fence line and too many calls from worried ranchers. When the computer idled, advertisements crawled across the screen. Compare life insurance quotes, affordable health insurance for families, low interest, credit card for retirees. A reminder that money and time were traps of another sort. She closed the pop-ups, drank lukewarm coffee, and circled a patch of the Bitterroot Range on her map. Reports of howls here last year. Hank Miller's dead calf not far below. It would be a good place to set trail cameras once the snow firmed up. Spring did its quiet work on the mountain. Snow pulled back from south-facing slopes, revealing old grass and the flattened ghosts of last year's flowers. The creek below Mara's ridge began to talk again, water chuckling over stones. Finn followed Mara down there one afternoon, hopping on 3 legs when the cold numbed the bad one. At the edge of the thawing ice, he batted at his reflection, then jumped back, startled, when another paw touched his from the glassy surface. Mara watched him and thought of Ash snapping at her own shadow once upon a time, years that now seemed like someone else's story. Hunting together was another lesson in differences. A wolf's way is to read the air, to find the herd, to work the edges of fear until one animal falters. Mara showed Finn how to creep along a contour, how to stay downwind, how to freeze when a head lifted. Finn tried for a while, but patience sat on him like an ill-fitting coat. His body wanted something else. He tensed, not when the herd shifted, but when a single rabbit broke from a bush, when a chipmunk flickered between rocks. On one of those days, while Mara was stalking a half-lame doe, Finn suddenly exploded from the brush beside her, a streak of spots and muscle. He launched himself onto a low stump, and from there onto the back of a snowshoe hare, pinning it with both front paws. It was clumsy and not at all textbook, but when he killed it with a bite at the neck, the motion was pure bobcat. Mara watched him drag the little body toward her, proud and puffed, and something in her eased. She could not make him a wolf. Trying would just break them both. But she could walk beside him while he became what he was meant to be, could stand between him and the worst teeth the world had to offer for as long as her own legs held. Not all danger came on 4 legs. One afternoon, the smell of carrion brought them to a half-buried elk carcass, ribs jutting from the snow like broken rafters. They had no way of knowing a black bear, thin and sore from a too long winter, had found it first and crawled into a nearby thicket to sleep off his meal. Finn, giddy with scent, bounded ahead and sank his teeth into the frozen hide. The bear woke to the sound and smell of thieves and came out roaring, snow flying from his shoulders as he rose to his full, ragged height. Mara leaped without thinking, planting herself between Finn and the charging bulk. She showed every tooth she owned and threw a snarl into the bear's face that rattled her own chest. For a moment he checked, surprised by the audacity of a single wolf. Finn, eyes wide, did the one thing his body knew best. He shot straight up the nearest pine, like water up a pump handle, claws biting into bark, hauling himself out of reach as showering snow and bark fell around him. From his perch he saw the bear swipe at Mara, felt the crack of air as the paw missed her by inches. She danced back, snapped at the bear's flank, giving ground, but never turning. It did not become a pitched battle. In the end, hunger and calculation warred in the bear's winter-dull mind. 2 half-starved thieves were not worth a broken leg this close to spring. With a final roar, he cuffed the carcass once, sending a spray of loose meat across the snow, and lumbered off into the trees. Mara stood trembling, hackles high, until the sound of his passage faded. Only then did she look up into the branches where Finn clung, sides heaving. He descended in fits and starts, claws scrabbling, until he could drop the last few feet and land beside her. He pressed himself against her shoulder, purring so hard his whole body buzzed. She could smell his fear and his strange joy at having escaped it. She touched his head with her nose and let out a low, breathy sound that might almost have been a laugh if wolves laughed. On a ridge half a mile away a week later, Maggie knelt in the snow and fixed a trail camera to a lodgepole pine. She angled it down a faint game trail, tightened the strap, checked the batteries with hands that had slipped a wedding ring off long ago. Her phone chimed in her pocket, some alert about a special offer on home security systems and car insurance bundles, and she silenced it without looking. The security she cared about lived and died by other rules. She stepped back, looked once more at the narrow path leading toward a cluster of dark rocks higher up, and made a small note on her clipboard. Camera 3, above Miller Ranch, possible wolf route. Had she walked another quarter-mile that day, she might have found the den tucked under the boulders, might have smelled the mingled scents of wolf and bobcat and old milk that no field guide prepared her for. Instead, she turned for the truck, her boots creaking in the afternoon chill. Behind her, Finn and Mara slipped through the trees, a mismatched pair learning, step by step, how to share a life neither of them was supposed to have. New smells were coming into their world, more coyote, more man, the heavy tang of other wolves, and the peace of these early lessons would not last. But for the moment, on that thin edge between winter and spring, a lone wolf was raising the wrong kind of hunter as gently as she knew how. By early summer, the easy days thinned out. Snow melted back into the shadows, and the green came up fast, but it was a thin, hungry green. A late frost had bitten the buds on the aspens, and the does that browsed the hillsides carried less weight on their bones than they should. Mara felt it first in the long gaps between fresh kills, in the way her ribs began to show again beneath her coat, and felt it in the growing length of their walks, in the restless way her pace quickened when she caught even a faint trace of elk or deer on the wind. Other noses read the same news. One morning, as they worked along a narrow bench above the creek, a new smell floated up, sharp, doggish, edged with rank excitement and old garbage. Coyotes. Not just the occasional passing scavenger, but a whole knot of them, their tracks stitching the mud in overlapping patterns. They had followed the thinning herds up out of the valley, drawn by the same needs that drove the wolves, always ready to slide into any gap the bigger predators left. Mara did what any sensible wolf would do. She steered wide, keeping her body between Finn and the freshest scent marks. But hunger has a way of wearing down good judgment, in animals and in people, staring at bills on a kitchen table. For coyotes, opportunity often arrived in the form of stolen meals, scraps clawed from someone else's work. For Finn, one bad morning, it came as the smell of meat so strong it drowned out everything Mara had tried to teach him about waiting. He found it while she was ranging farther than usual, nose deep in a faint trail that might lead to a limping cow elk. Down in a brushy swale, half hidden by willow and alder, 6 coyotes had pulled down a young deer. They had already torn into it, sides heaving, muzzles bloody. Finn, moving on 3 good legs and one that had heeled crooked, came over the lip of the swale and stopped dead, pupils round with shock at the richness of the scent. No one saw him at first. The coyotes snapped and jostled, too busy arguing over mouthfuls. Then Finn made his mistake. Hunger and youth shoved caution aside. He slid down the bank, ears flattened, body low, and darted in to seize a dangling strip of flank. For one sweet second he had it, warm and heavy between his teeth. Then the nearest coyote looked up. To the little pack, He was wrong from the start. Too big for a fox, wrong shape for a dog, not wolf, not one of them. An outsider stealing from a hard-won kill. The big male at the carcass's shoulder dropped his meat and came at Finn with lips peeled and eyes gone hard. The others fanned out without thinking, bodies moving in a pattern old as the hills. Finn tried to wheel away, but his bad leg betrayed him. He stumbled. The big male hit him shoulder first, knocking him sideways, then pinned him with both paws, his teeth driving down toward the soft place at Finn's throat. For Finn, the world shrank to hot breath and yellow teeth and the weight on his ribs. For a heartbeat, it seemed this was how his story would end. Not in a den he never should have known, not under Mara's watchful eye, but in a tangle of strangers' fur, a few seconds before the kill. What saved him was sound, the same weapon that once stitched Mara's family together across miles of dark timber. Her growl arrived before her body did, a deep rolling snarl that fit neither coyote nor dog. She plunged down the bank like a stone, tail high, ears flat, every hair on her body standing up. She hit the big male from the side, teeth flashing, and felt fur and skin give under her jaws. He yelped and spun, snapping at her muzzle. She danced sideways, then in again, quick and reckless. The others hesitated, unused to facing a wolf that did not have a pack behind her, but fought as if she did. Finn crawled free of the tangle, coughing, his chest burning where the paws had pinned him. From the brush, he watched Mara face down the six, lunging and feinting, always between them and him. In the end, numbers were on their side, but nerve was not. They had bellies full of meat and little interest in scars. One by one they backed away, tails lowering, ears slicked to their skulls. The big male spat a final curse of fur and sound and slunk off, limping slightly where her first bite had landed. Mara stood panting, foam at the corners of her mouth, a new tear in the skin along her shoulder. She turned to Finn, nose working, checking him from nose to tail with swift nudges. He pressed himself against her chest like a cub, purring so hard it rattled his bones, the near miss still buzzing through his limbs. She bumped his head once, hard enough to sting but not enough to hurt, a wordless scolding and reassurance tangled together. Their world did not grow safer after that. A week later, on a ridge to the north, Mara smelled wolves on the wind. Not the faint ghost of her lost pack, but a new clan, 4 strong, a young pair and 2 yearlings, muscles smooth under their coats, eyes bright with the easy confidence of a family that has not yet been broken by bullets or bad winters. She and Finn saw them at a distance, silhouetted against the sky, tails waving, moving like a single thought. The meeting, when it came, was brief and without blood. They crossed paths at a narrow saddle where 2 game trails met. Mara planted herself on one side, Finn behind her, his body low. The strange wolves fanned out on the other, sniffing, reading the situation as clearly as any rancher might read a balance sheet or a home insurance policy. Here was an old female, thin and scarred, tied by scent to a creature that was not wolf. No pack at her back, no territory clearly marked, no real threat, but no value either. The young male of the new pack stepped forward, lifted his leg, and marked a rock between them, a clear line drawn in invisible ink. His eyes met Mara's for a long moment. There was no hatred there, only calculation. Then he turned away, leading his family down the other trail. They did not chase Mara and Finn, did not drive them off with teeth. They simply took the heart of the country for themselves and left the edges, the poorer hunting and the rougher ground for the misfit pair. From that day, Mara and Finn moved more on the margins, steeper slopes, tighter draws, places where logging/still cluttered the ground. Their tracks crossed older wolf, prints and coyote pads, and more often, the flat, square impressions of human boots. Somewhere below, Hank Miller filled out paperwork for farm insurance and complained over coffee that something up there was still stealing from his range. In town, Maggie downloaded the first blurry images from her ridge cameras. A gray shape here, a spotted haunch there, ghosts on a tiny screen. None of them yet understood that all these lines, wolf, bull, bobcat, coyote, man, were drawing slowly in toward the same rough circle, where one wrong move could close them all at once. By late summer, Finn had traded his kitten clumsiness for something heavier and more dangerous. The spots on his coat had begun to blur into a richer, darker pattern. His shoulders filled out, and the healed leg that had once dangled uselessly now drove him forward with a rolling, powerful stride. When he moved beside Mara in the dim light under the pines, he no longer looked like something she could pick up by the scruff and carry. He looked like what he truly was, a young bobcat on the edge of his prime. Their play changed with him. What started as batting and wrestling in the den mouth turned into hard, full-body lunges. Finn loved to ambush, to vanish into brush and explode outward, paws spread, claws half-sheathed. Mara tolerated it the way a patient grandparent might tolerate a child's roughhousing, bracing herself and letting him slam against her ribs before knocking him aside with a paw or a gentle grab at the neck. Most days it ended with both of them panting in the dust, tongues lolling, the air full of their mingled scent. Then came the evening when play stopped being harmless. The heat had broken that afternoon. Clouds stacked over the Bitterroot peaks, and a cool breeze moved through the firs, rattling dry cones from their branches. Mara lay stretched in a patch of shade near the den, half dozing, listening to the creek far below and the occasional crack of a limb as a deer worked through the underbrush. Finn had been stalking grasshoppers in the open, pouncing and missing, leaping after his own tail as if it were prey. Without warning, he dropped into a crouch, eyes gone bright and focused, and slid into the shadow behind a boulder. Mara cracked an eye, her tail twitching once. She knew that look. She pretended not to see him, letting her head sink back to her paws. The air held the sharp, clean smell of coming rain, and under it the faint musk of his excitement. He launched himself a heartbeat later, a blur of muscle and fur. In his mind, he was still the small cub who could land on her with all his weight, and nothing worse would happen than a grunt and a shove. But there was more weight behind him now, more speed, and his body, built for killing in one clean movement, did what bodies like his are made to do. His front paws hit her shoulder with a solid thump. Claws, meant to hook into prey and hold, slid through her fur and bit deep into the skin. Underneath, Mara cried out, a sharp, shocked sound she had not planned to make. Pain lanced down her side. Finn tumbled off, more from surprise than momentum, and rolled into the dust. For a long second they both froze. Mara's heart hammered. Heat spread under her coat. When she lifted her head, she saw the red line along her shoulder where his claws had driven in. It was not a shallow scratch. It was a true wound, 4 clean furrows already welling blood. The smell of it hit both of them at once. Finn's eyes went wide. The mischief drained out of his face as completely as water drains from a broken glass. He took a step toward her, then another, ears flattened, tail low. A low sound came out of his throat, halfway between a purr and a sob. He reached his nose toward the wound, then flinched back, horrified by what he had done. Mara could feel the sting and the warm trickle down her leg. She could also feel something colder than pain underneath it. The clear, simple fact that his paws were now powerful enough to tear her open by accident. The game had changed. Her body, which had always been the shield between him and the world, was no longer the stronger of the two. She licked the wound a few times, tasting her own blood, then turned her head and bumped Finn's cheek with her nose. It was a small gesture, but it was all he needed. He pressed himself flat to the ground, then crept up and laid his head along her neck, purring so hard his whole frame vibrated. She let him stay there, even though the pressure pulled at the raw lines in her skin. That night she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt again the impact of his body, the unintentional blow of those claws. Outside, lightning flashed on the far ridges, brightening the den mouth for a heartbeat at a time. Thunder rolled in after, like distant trucks on a county road. On one of those low rumbles, the wind shifted and carried up the smell of gasoline and hot metal, of men's sweat and gun oil. Somewhere below, engines idled in a ranch yard. A television flickered behind a window, while Hank Miller shuffled through a stack of grain invoices and farm insurance forms, talking under his breath about wolves and losses and what the government would or wouldn't cover. At her kitchen table in town, Maggie Turner stared at a different kind of paper. A memo lay under her hand, printed with the dry language of liability and risk. There had been another calf killed near Hank's lower pasture. The new wolf pack was the likely culprit, but not everyone made fine distinctions. The order came down from above, increased monitoring, and, if necessary, lethal removal of any wolf found repeatedly near livestock. A service rifle lay in its locker in the next room, cleaned and ready. Her laptop chimed. An email banner rolled across the screen. Protect what matters most. Compare life insurance plans today. She closed it with a flick of her finger, then opened the folder, containing images from the first trail camera pulls of the season. Grainy pictures slid by. Deer at night, a fox, a raccoon standing on its hind legs like a guilty child. Then one frame made her sit up, a gray shape, blurred but unmistakable, and beside it a smaller, spotted animal, their heads close together over something she could not see. She leaned in, squinting. Wolf, she thought. And bobcat? That didn't make sense. The next frame showed only the empty trail, snow kicked up where they had been. She printed the picture and pinned it to a corkboard in her tiny office, a quiet question mark waiting for an answer she didn't have time yet to chase. Up on the ridge, Mara lifted her head and tasted the air again. The smell of man seemed thicker lately, threaded through the wind in ways she did not like. Machines had crawled higher on the flanks of the mountain that summer, four-wheelers buzzing along old logging roads, leaving behind the stinging stink of exhaust. Gunshots cracked now and again, distant but sharp, punctuating the days. Each one brought back, whether she wished it or not, the memory of the hollow where her family fell, of poison and metal and helplessness. There was another scent, too, new and unsettling in a different way. On the far side of the ridge, along a rocky spine she did not often cross, she picked up the marks of a bobcat she did not know. Female, full-grown, healthy. The smell was strong and certain, claiming a stretch of broken cliff and brushy draws where rabbits and grouse still moved thick. It was a world made for claws, like fins, and a body built to leap straight up. Mara lay in the den mouth and watched Finn sleep. Even in rest, he was bigger than the small scrap she had carried out of the trap. The bad leg lay at an odd angle, but it no longer slowed him much. In his dreams he twitched and kicked, chasing things she could not see. Once his paw jerked and brushed the band of scab along her shoulder, and she flinched, just the barest flinch, but enough. Love, she realized then, was no longer just what held them together. It was also what kept him here, tied to a life that did not fit the shape of him, in a strip of country growing more crowded with teeth and bullets every week. Staying meant more brushes with coyotes, more meetings with wolves who saw him as wrong, more chances for a rancher's rifle or a government bullet to find them both. And now staying meant risking her own life on every playful pounce. The mountain had given her one impossible family, and then taken it away. Now it had given her a second, stranger one. It was a gift she had clutched hard, because the alternative was emptiness. But gifts, she thought, were sometimes only meant to be held for a while before passed on to where they truly belonged. Sometime near dawn, as the first pale light seeped into the trees and the creek's voice grew louder with melting rain, Mara made her decision. She rose carefully so as not to wake Finn and Dad, stepped out into the chill. The scents were clearer in the cool air. Man, machine, the new wolf pack's claim, the harsh threat of coyote, and, from beyond the next ridge, the steady, confident markers of the lone female bobcat. Mara stood with her nose lifting and her torn shoulder aching, and traced in her mind a path that would lead not toward her old routes, but toward that other cat's world. Before the next storms came, before Hank's temper, or Maggie's orders, or Finn's growing strength brought disaster to their doorway, she would walk him there. She would do the hardest thing she had ever done, lead the one creature who made the silence bearable out of her life, and into the place he was meant to survive. Behind her, Finn stirred and murmured in his sleep, unaware that the shape of his days was about to change. In the valley, a phone began to ring in Maggie's office, another complaint from another worried landowner. Somewhere in that tangle of human voices and animal scents, the lines between love and danger had finally crossed. They left before the sun had cleared the far ridge, slipping out of the den while the light was still blue and thin. Finn trotted at Mara's shoulder, unaware that the path she had chosen this morning was not one of their usual loops. The air was cool and damp, all pine and stone, and the faint promise of rain. Below in the valley, porch lights winked out one by one as people headed to work, some to offices, some to fields, all of them thinking about gas prices, grocery bills, maybe checking mortgage rates, or reviewing a life insurance statement before they shut the door. Up here, another kind of reckoning was underway. Mara led him along the spine of the ridge, over ground she had only scouted at a distance. The scent of the other bobcat was clearer now, female, healthy, her markers laid down with the easy confidence of an animal well rooted in her place. The land changed as they went, more broken rock, more low juniper and twisted brush, fewer big trees. It was cat country, full of ledges and tucked-away ledges where a spotted body could vanish in a blink. Finn moved easily, never guessing. He bounded ahead now and then to bat at a grass stem or chase a beetle, then circled back, brushing against her shoulder, purring under his breath. When he veered off toward a stand of scrub, Mara called him back with a low woof. He came at once, as he always had, eyes bright, trusting her sense of where they should go. On a distant hill, Maggie Turner parked her state truck where an old logging road washed out and went on foot. The morning briefing still rang in her ears. More pressure to protect ranchers like Hank. More talk about predator control and cost-benefit analysis, words that sounded as dry as a loan document for a reverse mortgage. She had slung the service rifle over her shoulder because the policy said she had to, not because she wanted to use it. In the breast pocket of her vest, folded printout of that strange trail camera image, wolf and bobcat together, scratched against her every time she moved. She climbed toward the saddle where she'd positioned one of her cameras, boots crunching in old snowfields and loose rock. As she neared the crest, she slowed, instincts honed by years in the field humming in her blood. There was a feeling in the air, the sense that something ahead was already in motion. Mara and Finn came to the edge of a shallow basin ringed by stone. Below, a tangle of brush and rock ledges stepped down toward a shaded hollow. The scent of the female bobcat lay thick there, layered and sure. Mara stopped. Finn bumped into her hindquarters, then looked up, puzzled. He could smell it too now. That other presence, similar to his and yet not his. His ears pricked forward, whiskers quivering. Somewhere down in the rocks, a shape moved, sleek, powerful, spotted, eyes reflecting a flash of pale light. The female bobcat stepped into view, head high, tail low, and twitching. She froze when she saw them on the rim, wolf and bobcat together, a picture that ought not to exist. Her body went tight, caught between fight and flight. Finn leaned forward, scent washing over him, something in his bones answering in a way it never had to coyotes or wolves or bears. Mara touched his flank with her nose, one last gentle nudge. Then she did the cruelest, kindest thing she knew how to do. She stepped around him, down from the rim, and snapped her jaws near his face with a bark that held none of the softness he'd ever heard from her. She drove her shoulder into his chest, hard, shoving him down the slope toward the basin. Finn tumbled, scrabbling for purchase, more shocked than hurt. When he found his feet again, he stood halfway between her and the strange female, chest heaving, eyes hurt and wide. He started back up toward Mara, a small, questioning cry in his throat. Mara met him with a snarl, lips peeled, ears pinned. It was a show, but it cut her all the same. Everything in her wanted to pull him back into the circle of her body, to lick his face and tell him it was all a mistake. Instead, she held the line, driving him back with one more feint, her tail stiff, her stance saying as plainly as scent could speak, "You don't belong with me anymore." The female bobcat watched, puzzled, then took a few steps toward Finn. She sniffed the air, caught the story. Male, young, alone except for this wrong-smelling guardian. She made a soft, throaty sound and closed the distance, touching her nose lightly to Finn's shoulder. When he didn't pull away, she began to groom the fur along his neck in slow, deliberate strokes, the way mother cats do with frightened young. Up on the ridge above, Maggie eased herself to the top of a rocky outcrop and froze. Below her, in a bowl of stone, a scene unfolded that didn't fit any management plan or wildlife textbook on her shelves. A lone gray wolf stood stiff-legged at the lip, every line of her body screaming reluctance and resolve. A bobcat, male and female, met and settled into a slow, delicate dance of scent and touch. The wind brought it all to Maggie in layers. Wolf, cat, cat, the sour ghost of old steel on scar tissue, the clean bite of high air. Her hand went to the rifle without thinking and then stopped. There, in the space between heartbeats, something in Maggie shifted. She saw not a problem wolf to be removed, but a mother standing at the door of a world and refusing, at great cost, to step through with the child she loved. The barrel of the gun dipped. She let her breath out in one long stream. Somewhere far away, a television ad for a home security system promised safety in 30-second bursts. Here, safety meant lowering a weapon and letting a wild choice stand. Mara held herself one moment longer, memorizing the way Finn looked pressed up against his own kind, the way his shoulders fit, the way his tail moved, the way his body eased into a shape she could never have given him. Then she turned without ceremony and walked away. She did not look back. If she had, she feared her legs might fail her. Time blurred after that. Autumn came, crisp and bright, then slid into the long blue shadows of another winter. Mara learned again how to move alone through snow, how to ration her strength, how to curl into herself at night against the cold. Some days the ache of absence was as sharp as the wind. Other days it dulled to something she carried like an old injury, flaring only when some small thing, an echoing cry, a set of tracks near the creek, brushed against it. Maggie worked her routes, checked her cameras, filed her reports. Once at a meeting in town, she showed a still image to a small circle of colleagues and one skeptical rancher. It was a frame pulled from a camera she'd moved higher up the ridge that fall. A wolf and a nearly grown bobcat, side by side at a carcass, muzzles both lowered, bodies relaxed, as if sharing the spoils of a hunt. No one spoke right away. Hank, invited to the table because the wolves were his problem as much as hers, stared at Et for a long time. "Well, I'll be," he said finally, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Didn't think I had neighbors like that." The real shock came later, when spring loosened the snow's grip and the mountain opened its paths again. Mara had pulled down a small deer after a long chase and was eating in slow, tired bites when the fur along her neck rose. She felt eyes on her. She lifted her head, lip curling, ready for coyote or bear or one of the young wolves from the new pack. A shape stood on the rock above her, big-shouldered, thick-furred, spots darker now, ears tufted and proud. A bobcat male in his full strength. For a fleeting breath, she saw only that, a stranger. Too close. Then he moved, and the way he placed his feet, the tilt of his head, the scar on the old bad leg, all spoke with a language she knew as well as her own. Heartbeat. Finn came down the rock in 3 easy bounds. He did not rush her. He walked with the measured confidence of an animal who had learned his place in the world. But when he reached her, he did the thing only one creature had ever done with her before. He touched his nose gently to hers and held it there, breathing in and out in the quiet, steady way of kin. For a moment there was no mountain, no cameras, no rifles, no talk of predator control or farm insurance or health insurance or how to balance a budget in a town far below. There was only breath shared, and the deep recognition that ran from that first cry in the ravine to this meeting on the ridge. Then Finn nudged the deer carcass toward her, just a fraction, and stepped back. An invitation and a thank you, all in one. They ate together in silence, not as packmates or mates, but as 2 lives that had crossed in an impossible way and left marks neither would ever quite shake. When he was done, Finn shook himself, cast one last calm, measuring look at her, then melted back into the brush, heading toward the broken country where another bobcat waited. Mara watched him go until the last twitch of tail vanished among the rocks. Then she lifted her head to the empty sky. She did not howl. The habit had gone from her long ago, but she let out a long, low breath that seemed to take with it some of the weight she'd carried since the night her howls first went silent. Down in the valley, folks would watch the finished wildlife documentary someday. Maybe on a streaming service they paid for with a credit card they were still trying to pay down, and hear the narrator say that everything changed in the seconds before a kill, when a hungry wolf turned away from a dying deer to follow the final cry of a bobcat cub. What happened next, they'd be told, shocked the biologists, the rancher, the people who'd set the cameras, and, if they were honest, even the wolf herself. For the ones who stayed with the story to the last frame, the shock would soften into something else, the quiet realization that sometimes the wildest thing isn't a chase or a fight, but a choice to love across every line the world says cannot be crossed, and then, when the time comes, to let that love walk away. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.